Hello, everyone. My name is Tatiana. I'm a founder of Mintycode, the world's biggest hub for tech ecosystems. Today, I will talk about peer-to-peer monetizations. Throughout my entrepreneurial journey, I learned about different ways how you can monetize your open source. And I think I found the one that works. And today I would like to share with you lessons I learned while building Mintycode. I will talk about disadvantages of traditional monetization channels and benefits of peer-to-peer monetization. About my background, I'm a serial entrepreneur. Mintycode is my fifth startup. I did and founded several other companies. Some of them succeeded, some of them did not, but I like solving problems. So it's my day-to-day job to solve problems. I participate in a lot of hackathons, coding bootcamps, hacker houses. You can find me there. With one of startups, I was even featured in Forbes 30 Under 30. I'm completed my PhD in computer science, but I was not always in tech. So many years ago, I actually was a lawyer and also was trained to be a financial analyst. I'm always solving for problems I'm always looking for problems to solve, and that's why 2 years ago I founded a Mintycode as a community, decentralized community of software creators. And the goal of community was to actually solve the problem of fairness and transparency in open source. As experienced entrepreneur, I knew that when I start something, I need to do extensive user research and research of the problem. So that's why I went to different hackathons, hacker houses, found a lot of developers. I interviewed 88 software engineers to learn about how often do they contribute to open source. And that's what I found. People who work on their own side projects, they generally, most of them contribute to open source at least several times per year. I even met people who contributed to open source on a daily basis and weekly basis. But what was interesting that around 35% of people whom I asked have never contributed to open source. And there are two main reasons why they don't contribute. The first is lack of time. They just don't have time to work on that because they're busy with their full-time job or their own project, or because of lack of incentive. They just don't want to work for free. When I ask, how do you monetize your work, your contribution to open source, what was interesting that 92% of people whom I interviewed said that they never even thought about monetizing their open source. They believe that open source is free and there is no way how you can make money from the day one. Only 8% of people were exploring different monetization channels and monetization routes. And what are traditional monetization channels that people use, especially if you're an entrepreneur who is going to start your project and you don't have a lot of support from venture capital? So you can rely on donations, but we all know that donations are not a sustainable source of income, so you cannot rely on them. And it's also not sustainable for people who fund projects through donations because they don't expect anything in return. So it's not linked to deliverables. You can run your business as software. You can host it somewhere and then charge a fee for people who would like to use it in a hosted and in a separate environment. But it has nothing to do with open source and community, right? And it's just a software business. You can also charge for additional premium features, or you can introduce additional features under separate license. But what is the problem with these monetization channels? So most of these monetization strategies, they overlook contributors' effort. And contributors and contributions in open source, this is the main advantage of open source projects. So most traditional monetization channels, they do have funder and they have contributors. And who is contributor? Contributor is anyone who fixed an issue, raised an issue, reviewed PR, or proposed a feature. Because what is important when you're building a company or tool or creating something new is feedback. And open source gives you free feedback. And how funding right now is organized, there is always, to some extent, it's always centralized. There is a limited group of people. It can be project owners, limited group of maintainers, sometimes foundations that control the distribution of funds. Funders, who are funders, most time it's open source users, people who rely on these open source components. And you can see that in this model, contributors, real contributors who help you to develop projects, they don't have access to the funds directly from the users. So what are disadvantages of these traditional monetization channels? The first disadvantage is lack of transparency, because if you don't have visibility on what is going on with the funding, how much funding was received and how it was distributed, then you are less likely will contribute to this open source project. Lack of contributors' incentives. If no one is rewarding you fairly for your work, why would you share publicly this, your changes or improvements that you suggested? You just can keep them private and use this open source project and any updates and fixes you made for your own. And inefficient allocation of funds. This is another disadvantage for open source users, for people who fund open source projects. If they sponsor or if they fund open source projects through foundations or through a limited group of maintainers, then contributors sometimes may get nothing. So what is peer-to-peer monetization? Peer-to-peer monetization is a direct economic exchange between users and contributors, between people who are actually looking for help and people who are able to solve their problems. In case of peer-to-peer monetization, how it works is that the funder funds directly the issue they would like to be solved, and they fund the developer or person who has sufficient time to solve this problem right now when they need it, and they agreed on a reward, how much will it cost. Of course, if it would be just individual collaboration, it would be difficult to call it open source. That's why if you decide to focus on peer-to-peer monetization, then you need to ensure that there is a framework for that monetization, that everyone, every contributor can follow this framework. What advantages of peer-to-peer monetization? For open source users, it's efficient allocation of funds. So you get, your problems are solved when they need to be solved. You will always find people who have sufficient amount of time to solve your problem if it's urgent. For open source creators, it's all about user adoption, because you want more people using your product, and also you want to ensure that you are building sustainable ecosystem. And for open source contributors, it's about fair rewards and transparency. So how you create sustainable tech ecosystems and enable peer-to-peer monetization? So the first step is to establish a fair and transparent contribution and reward system. So what does it mean, fair? Fair, it means that your work is compensated based on the amount of time and effort you put into this work, right? And transparent means that everyone sees and everyone understands that this amount of work and that effort will be rewarded in a specific way. So what are the strategies of fair and transparent reward system? So you can explore different revenue sharing models, defining what proportion of revenue will be shared depending on complexity of the task and type of contribution. You can also explore different code bounties and make it clear to community that if they solve the issue, they will receive a specific amount that will come directly from funders. And you can explore different community-led milestone-based grants where you award community members who help you to improve the project based on milestones that they achieve. The second step to enable your peer-to-peer monetization strategy is enable direct exchange between users and contributors. Why is it important? Because it's all about transparency. What is important when you enable direct communication between user and contributor? The first is you need to give them space to negotiate, right? The demand, you need to match demand and supply, and you need to show that there is negotiation and fair agreement on the amount of time and reward that they will get for the work that they will do. But also it's important that these negotiations, they happen in open, that everyone can see what everyone is receiving in return for that amount of work. And you need to explore trusted payment mechanisms. And the best ways how you can enable direct transfer of funds. The third step is to create a feedback loop and provide recognition, because open source is all about building community and creating ecosystem. So how you can create a feedback loop? Introduce some voting rights, introduce merit-based membership and reputation system where developers can have different levels of rights depending on how much they contributed to the project, and give them right to vote based on how the ecosystem will survive, how they want it to develop in future. So result is sustainable tech ecosystem. That's what you want to build. If you don't want to build just a product, a business, but you want to create an ecosystem that will exist for many years, think about peer-to-peer monetization and how to enable your community to earn from contributing to your project. So that was my presentation. You can find me on Twitter, LinkedIn. You can scan the QR code. And now it's time for questions.